listening to the best of the Martha Zoller Show. To hear the full show each day, tune in to AM 550 and FM 102.9 WDUN or log in to accesswdun.com and click the Listen Live button from 9 to 11 Monday through Friday. It is the Martha Zoller Show. We are here today with the Consul General of Israel for the Southeast, Anat Sultan Dadon, and we welcome you back to the studio, Anat. How are you?
Thank you. Always a pleasure being with you, Martha.
And I know you folks want us to talk about the earthquake that happened last night, which was President Trump saying something nice about Governor Kemp, but we are going to get to that in the second hour, so I want you to stay with us. But we are talking to Anat Sultan Dadon, and I got that right? I practice every day so that I can get that right, because I don't have to spell it right, but I do have to say it right. So let's start out. Of course, the audio that you heard was the Israeli representative at the UN, and we, of course, are now in the 10th month of this war that started on October 7th with the violent taking of hostages into Gaza. And so give us an update on where it is from your perspective today.
We are today day 322 since October 7th, and for 109 hostages who remain still in captivity in Gaza. October 7th is not over. It has been stretching for 322 days. The hostages include 2 children, a baby, a toddler, men, 15 women. And while Israel is making every effort in order to see them return home, unfortunately, we are facing a terror organization that is still unwilling not only to release our hostages, but to finally bring some peace and quiet to their own people.
So this week, 6 bodies of hostages were recovered by the IDF. It looked to me, I looked at the list of names, it was mostly older men, but one young man, 34 years old. I mean, my concern is at this point, we're not going to get any hostages back alive. That is my concern. But when you hear that news, you've got to be happy in some ways for these families to have some closure. But at the same time, you just don't know what it is for the others.
It is devastating for the families. It is devastating for the people of Israel. The 6 bodies that were recovered were all recovered with bullet wounds. Contrary to what Hamas keeps claiming, and we know that they spread lies everywhere and about everything, they were shot. And we have grave concern for the hostages who remain still in captivity, for their well-being, for their lives, and that is why it is of utmost urgency to see them released. Unfortunately, while Israel is making every effort alongside the United States and others, Hamas still refuses a deal.
So I think from a political standpoint, we're not going to get too deep into politics, but it does seem like this administration has been all over the board in the things that they've said related to their support of Israel. But I do think at the end of the day, the United States of America has been supporting Israel
absolutely
in this fight. Is that the way you see it also?
Absolutely.
Yes.
And I think that has been the clear message, not just with regards to Hamas in Gaza, but to the region, and of course to the Iranian regime, which is the terror state that is operating, guiding, funding, training, and directing all of these terror proxies that we are seeing in our region, be it Hamas in Gaza, Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, militias in Iraq. These are all tentacles of the Iranian terror regime.
And look, folks, I know a lot of you, we get different points of view, and we welcome that. We're the United States of America. This is what makes us great, is that we can agree disagreeably with each other. I know sometimes it feels like when you look at the world where we live right now, it's not that way, but it still is. We still have to remember that it is that way. But at the same time, you've got Iran that has hacked into both of the presidential candidates in the last week or so. That's been revealed. Iran is trying to keep everything unsettled in the world. I mean, and they're aligning with the other bad guys in the world to be able to do that. And, you know, I know that sometimes, you know, I know a lot of people thought President Bush was a little too simplistic about certain things, but he was very clear about who the good guys were and who the bad guys were. And I don't think we should be afraid to say that. We should not be afraid to say these people are wrong and these people are trying to do the right thing. And how can we fix that?
I fully agree. And I think that one of the major problems that we are seeing right now in the international community is confusion. And there shouldn't be confusion. There shouldn't be confusion between right and wrong. There shouldn't be confusion when it comes to those who seek to end the free world and all of the values that we believe in. Because Iran and its many terror proxies, through its destabilizing activities, both in the region and around the world, as you just mentioned, they seek a different world order. They seek a radical Islam to take over the world as we know it. That has to be confronted very, very clearly. It cannot be that any of us are confused about what their goal is. Their goal is not just about destroying Israel or the Jewish people. They are out to destroy the free world, to destroy America, to destroy everything that we all believe in, that we all value in life, in freedom, in democracy. We should be very, very clear, and we should confront anyone who is confused about this right now.
Well, and we should. It's very easy to support the state of Israel because while, yes, it's a Jewish state, yes, it is a country that is predominantly Jewish, but it is also a country that has Arabs and people from all over the world. And I saw a report of the BBC of all places, because they have not been the best place to watch coverage, but of the different people from different countries or ethnicities, I should say, in the IDF, that people are serving in this army that is protecting Israel that are from all walks of life in Israel.
Absolutely. The IDF represents the makeup of the Israeli society, be it secular, religious, be it Jewish, non-Jewish, be it on this side or on that side of the political map, be it immigrants from Ethiopia or from Europe or from any Middle Eastern country. We have not only people from all over the world, because the Jewish people are finally able to reconvene in our ancient homeland, but we have a significant population. Roughly 20% of our population is non-Jewish, and they are fully Israeli with full Israel rights. They are part of fighting now shoulder to shoulder against those who threaten the existence of the state of Israel.
And, you know, we in the United States have an all-volunteer army, and we live in a world where we don't have battles like Normandy anymore, where we plan to lose 10,000 people in one day. We have a different sort of situation that we have here in the free world. I almost said so-called, but we are the free world. Israel is very different. From their inception in 1948, every military-age adult has been expected to serve in some way or another. And I think that creates a kind of cohesiveness in your society that we may be missing here. I'm not saying we should go back to the draft, but I'm just saying there is a cohesiveness because of that, because everybody understands what their role is.
The mandatory military service for men and women in Israel is a necessity. But I think aside from being a necessity, it does serve to make a more cohesive society, to make a society in which the individuals understand that there is something bigger than their own personal needs, that it takes all of us to contribute to the incredible sovereign nation of Israel and to ensure its continued survival.
I think the biggest shock, other than waking up on October 7th, I mean, that was a day where I woke up and I was just sobbing in my living room after seeing what was happening, because that was many hours after it had happened. But then the kind of anti-Semitic protests that were breaking out around my country, around other places in the world, I guess I lived in a world where I thought that kind of stuff didn't exist anymore, or it didn't exist to where it could be welcomed by other people. Did that surprise you, number one? And number two, what is the status today? Is it getting worse? Is it getting better? Where is it?
I think it absolutely took us by surprise. Not the fact that there were demonstrations against Israel.
You're used to that.
Yes, that has been something that we are sadly very familiar with for decades. But the fact that across the world, here in the United States, so many think that they are identifying with the Palestinians, call themselves pro-Palestinian, while what they are in fact doing is spewing hatred, anti-Semitism, support of terror, and they are being commended by Hezbollah, by Hamas, by the Iranian regime. That is of incredible concern to us, to Israel, to the Jewish community. But here in the United States, first and foremost, it should be of concern to America, to American society. Because what is going on the streets and on university, colleges, and campuses is incredibly dangerous. It is dangerous today, and it endangers the future of the values that we all stand for.
Well, and in many ways, it is using our freedom of speech and freedom of religion against us. There was a video that came out of imam, and the caption was, "Where do you think this is happening?" And it's an imam talking about ending the Jews, and they'll do on October 7th as many times as they can, and it turned out it was in a mosque in Detroit that this was happening. And look, I'm a Christian, and there are radical Christians. Okay, there was a group, and there are more than one group, but there's one that's very famous called the Westboro Baptist Church, and they were going around and they were protesting funerals, and they were saying horrible, vile things, and they were calling themselves a Christian church. And my church, as well as others, spoke out against them and said, this does not represent what we believe as the faith that we call Christianity. And they are kind of pariahs. I'm sure they still exist in some way, but we said, no, this is not our faith. I'm sure within the Jewish faith, there are people that do radical things, and you have to stand up. I think there is this either fear or lack of ability to stand up against, for lack of a better term, radical Islam, where they're spewing this kind of death to a group of people. I mean, I don't know what religion in the history of the world thinks that the death to a group of a people is a good thing. I just don't understand it, and it's very hard for me to get my head around.
I think that one of the dangers is not only what they are doing, but the fact that there is an atmosphere in which you mention speaking up against such hatred, but there are not enough who are speaking up against it. We do not have currently still enough voices who are clearly saying that it is unacceptable. It is unacceptable to call for the genocide of the Jewish people. It is unacceptable to call for the destruction of a sovereign nation, the nation of Israel. It is unacceptable to burn American flags, which is what they are doing as well. It is unacceptable to support terror organizations that not only see Israel and the Jewish people as the enemy, they see America and American people as the enemy, and are responsible also for taking American lives. How is it that the flags of these terror organizations are being proudly waved in America? That is unacceptable, and there should be a stronger voice from leaders and from people all across America, speaking up very, very clearly and strongly, clarifying that this is not what America stands for.
With the Olympics, there was a gymnast who was killed on October 7th.
That's right.
That was Israeli. And they released the clip of her being chased by the Hamas terrorists. And it's from a distance, so it's not gruesome, although you're very aware of what's happening. Okay? She's running. They're chasing her. She gets to the point she can't run anymore because they're on the other side. She turns around, gets down on her knees, and is clearly begging for her life. And then they shoot her, and she falls over. And, you know, I don't know how anybody can watch that and not believe that it happened. But yet I saw interviews this week, Anat, with people who not only did they deny the Holocaust, that's almost like you know, mundane in today's crazy world. But they're denying that something they saw with their own eyes on October 7th happened. And that is just sickness to me. That has nothing to do with ideology. That is a person that has been brainwashed to the point that there's almost no, I always believe in redemption, but there's almost no redemption for that.
October 7th was not only the largest massacre committed against Jews in a single day since the Holocaust, it is also likely the most documented massacre ever committed because the perpetrators were busy documenting the horrendous crimes against humanity that they were committing while they were committing them, in many cases uploading them to social media, at times to the victims' social media channels in real time. There is no question about the atrocities that were committed that day. The only question for those who have the audacity to deny the atrocities is how they can see themselves as standing on the right side of history, because they are clearly not only standing on the wrong side of history, but they are doing a grave disservice to morality and to humanity. Just recently, we saw astounding data published. UN Women has posted 337 posts between December of 2023 and August of 2024. 337 posts. Of those, it dedicated 69 posts to Palestinian women in Gaza. Zero posts to mention the 15 women still being held hostage in brutal captivity in Gaza. Women that the world saw being taken captive in bloodied pants. We know what they are going through, not only from what we saw on October 7th, but we know what they are going through because of the testimonies that we have from hostages who have been released. And UN Women is silent?
Well, it's not only UN Women. I have been shocked by the silence of traditional women's groups.
Absolutely.
On all of this, because as Sheryl Sandberg again pointed out, rape is a weapon because it's easy, it works, and it terrifies people. I mean, it takes something from you. Sexual assault takes something from you. And in this video also, there's interviews with some men that were hiding, that heard what was going on, and the torture they're feeling because their instinct was to go out and try to help. But they had to make that decision. What good is it if I go help and I get killed too? Then there's nobody to tell this story. There's nobody to tell what happened if I get killed too. And I think we live in such a protected world. We are so blessed to live in the country that we live in. But what keeps me up at night right now, Anat, is that our border has been so open for the last 3.5 years with people that we don't know that are coming across this border. There's 170 some that are on the terrorist watch list that we know of. Okay, but how many not? What keeps me up at night is a Hamas-style attack in a neighborhood in America. And if that happens, it is going to be because we turned our head away and didn't face the truth.
I think the truth is crucial right now. And spreading and sharing the truth is crucial. With regards to the gender-based violence that occurred, the atrocities that were committed, by the way, not only against women. We have testimonies of men who were raped. Women were mutilated, men were mutilated, young girls were raped and mutilated, then slaughtered. What we face is not just about Israel and the Jews. It doesn't end with us. And I think that message is a message that still too many do not understand.
So Lee in White County said, the Bible tells us that the Jewish nation in Israel will always be persecuted until Christ's return. If these pro-terrorist groups want to free Palestine, then they should get off our streets and campuses and join Hamas and Hezbollah and walk the talk. Then the IDF can do what they do best to these malcontents. You're right. They abuse the First Amendment in support of these terrorists. They fail to understand that Israel is the apple of God's eye, and they don't stand a chance. That's what Lee in White County said. And, you know, it is one of those things where people go, why are you so concerned about Israel, Martha? Why are you doing that? I said, because first of all, you're the only democracy. You're a friend of the United States. It was wrong what happened on October 7th. But as a Christian person, I know, I jokingly say I've read the book. I know what happens. Okay. And I know that this is wrongful persecution. But I do have more hope that, and not to be too religious, but God gave us free will, which means we can do the right thing or the wrong thing. And if we keep doing the right thing, then things will be better for Israel. I want to know, because you grew up in Israel, right? And you have a family and all of that. For your entire life, you've been dealing with this sort of problem in your life where you have to worry about these kinds of things. What's your story? How did you get into the service of this nation, but also what was it like growing up?
I grew up in Israel and also in different countries around the world because my father was a diplomat as well. And so I grew up with a very strong Israeli identity and understanding what representing Israel is about. And I grew up with pride. And I have that pride still today. I feel incredibly proud and fortunate and see it a privilege to be able to represent my country and my people for the past 20 years now that have been in the Israeli Foreign Service. And I think that pride is really what defines Israel and Israelis. Because for our 76 years that we have constantly been under attack, we have constantly been facing threats by those who seek to destroy us. We have not only survived, we have thrived. And we know that we will continue to do so despite these attempts, despite the horrible time that we are in when we are not only weeping for all that we have lost on October 7th, but also for our 109 brothers and sisters that we need to see home. But we know that we are strong, and we know that we are here to stay, and we know that those chants of free Palestine will never become a reality at the cost of the existence of the state of Israel. And that is a message that anyone who wants to see a better future for the Palestinians need to start telling to the Palestinian people. That if they seek self-determination, if they seek a better future for their children, then they need to start focusing on that, not the destruction of their neighbor.
So what can we do? What can an average American do to help Israel, but also to help with this messaging that we need?
I think that everyone has the ability and right now the duty to use their voice. To use their voice in conversation, to use their voice in leadership, be it in faith leadership, in political leadership, in academic leadership, in the media, to call out those who, A, have no regard for these 109 hostages remaining in Gaza, including 8 American citizens, but B, are doing a disservice not just to Israel and the Israeli hostages that are suffering. They're just doing a disservice to the Palestinian people, because by not demanding of Hamas to surrender and release the hostages, they are prolonging the suffering for the Palestinian people, because the Palestinian people deserve to be free of an oppressive terror organization that is not only dedicated to destroying Israel, it has absolutely no regard and intentionally places its own people in harm's way. The Palestinians deserve to be free of a terror organization that willfully places them in harm's way and has been indoctrinating them for decades, indoctrinating their children for decades, teaching them hatred rather than teaching them how to build a future.
So the last IDF spokesman I spoke to, David Baruch, made that same point, is that, IDF will do what they do and they will bring the war to an end, and at some point we will have peace. Okay. But that there is this long-term project that is going to have to be in place, because there has been a generational teaching to Palestinian children to hate Jews. And he made the point, he says, I have 5 children. I never taught any of them to hate Arabs. And so that, but there are people that have been taught to hate me. And, since the beginning of time, unfortunately, that's been the way it's been. It doesn't make it right, but it's always there. Years ago, I spoke to Alon Pincus a number of times. And at the time I started talking to him, he was in his 40s. And of course, he's older now. And he told the story that was very poignant about how he had lived his entire life being in, not in fear, but being aware that these kinds of things can happen all the time. And I remember that night thinking about how thankful I was that I didn't have to live like that, but also so sad that there are a group of people that have to live like that. And we shouldn't have to live like that. There are 11 million Arabs that have been killed since 1948, and only something like 0.2% were killed by Israelis. Most of the Arabs that have been killed since 1948 have been killed by each other. Okay, so the problem is not Israel. And I don't understand why people can't see that.
In 1948, our Declaration of Independence clearly states that our hand is extended in peace to all of our neighbors. And we have seen since 1948 that whenever there was a leader courageous enough to choose a path of peace, recognizing that that is the best option for their country, for their people, we have seen peace realized in 1979 with Egypt, in 94 with the Kingdom of Jordan, and more recently with the historic, monumental Abraham Accords in 2020 with between Israel, Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates, Morocco that joined. There is room for optimism, because we know that not only have these leaders chosen a path of peace, there are other leaders that have already declared their intent to normalize relations with Israel, because they recognize that it is in the best interest of their country, of their people, if they want to look to the future.
Well, and wasn't there recently, I read something that there's some talks going on, I think in Indonesia, the largest Muslim country in the world, really, that there's positive talks going on there too. So let's be honest, Israel's a great business partner. Okay, we haven't talked much about that today, but Israel is a great business partner. So there's a lot of reasons to recognize Israel and to work with Israel, because you guys are forward thinking in many ways.
Absolutely. And I think that the mentioning the Abraham Accords, the countries who have chosen to join the Abraham Accords did so because they know that we have not only common challenges that we can better face together, but also mutual interests and opportunities that we can better promote and pursue together. And in the technological sector, we are already seeing so many agreements and collaborations between Israel and these countries, which go towards benefiting our countries and people, but even more broadly, the I2U2 initiative that includes the two I's are Israel and India. The two U's are the United States and the United Arab Emirates. This is an example of what the fruits of peace can look like. Collaboration in working together to address global challenges together.
If people want to know more about the work you're doing, how can they do that?
They can follow us on social media. We also send out a daily newsletter from the consulate that includes updates in order to be able to learn more and share the truth.
Anat Sultan Dadon, thank you for being with me today.
Thank you so much for having me again.
It's local radio, and that's why you're listening. It's the Martha Zoller Show on AM 550 and FM 102.9 WDUN.
We are joined right now with Brian Robinson, longtime communications director for Governor Nathan Deal, has his own company now, Robinson Republic. He's involved all over the place. He's on Political Breakfast, and gosh, you just show up everywhere. And you're my colleague on the Georgia Gang.
That's right. Unfortunately, we never get to be on together.
We never see each other.
But we share a seat.
But apparently we're interchangeable now.
That's nice.
Yes, because we're both white. Okay, it's all right. I can say that. We can, because they have to make sure that they've got the right balance of people every week. Yeah, so you and I can switch anytime we want.
That's fantastic.
But me and Janelle could not.
Yeah, I don't. This isn't white privilege, is it?
That's right.
That's not what this is.
No, it's the opposite of that. But anyway, all right. So we've got this Democratic convention, and a lot of things are happening there. I think it's interesting that we are being called the people that want to do away with democracy, meaning Republicans. Yeah. But yet the Democrats, misrepresented the jobs numbers. They disenfranchised 14 million voters. They kept their primaries closed. I mean, there's all kinds of things that they accuse us of that they're actually doing. So.
Yeah, and the beauty of it is that you just kind of touched on the edge of those misrepresentations that we saw over the week when one thing I kept hearing, one odd thematic was this book ban, that Republicans don't want you to read books, or they want to choose what books you read. As if, there's some Republican guard going through Barnes and Nobles, taking stuff off the shelf and burning them. Like, what Republicans are talking about is sexually explicit material in relation to kids who are in first and second grade. I mean, is that really a book ban? And let us not forget, who was it? Was it the left or the right that thought that Dr. Seuss had to be rewritten for modern eyes because it was troublesome? Who was it, the left or the right, who, when I was growing up, thought that Huck Finn was offensive because it had a racial slur in it, even though the book is about the inhumanity of slavery, and the formerly enslaved man in the book is a wise, noble character who represents humanity. So was that the left or the right? Who has been the one trying to do the censorship in this country? And both Clinton and Obama talked about the need to build more housing, to bring housing prices down. I agree with them. You know who else was talking about it? Governor Brian Kemp of Georgia. This has been something that's a priority of his. We've got to have a place for our workers to live. But who is it standing in the way of construction? It is the left with their onerous zoning regulations that have made it too expensive and in some cases impossible to build the housing that we need. Look no further than California, home of Kamala Harris. In Northern California, they're trying to build a new city because Northern California's housing prices are outrageous. A 1950s ranch costs $1.8 million.
Well, did you see? You probably didn't see this because it just passed through the California legislature, and they expect the governor to sign it. But it is going to be a zero down, 0% interest for people to buy homes in California, where the state is going to basically finance the down payment that someone might need, and there's no guidelines for when it's paid back. I mean, it's like, okay, so first of all, it's going to collapse the California real estate market.
We saw it in 08. That's what we did.
Yeah.
Was that kind of stuff.
That's what will happen. And than people who can't afford the house. Because if you go back to the housing crisis of 2008, there's a great book out there called Irreconcilable Differences that names, and it's a New York Times reporter, and it tells exactly what happened. But basically what happened was they kind of like with the subprime in the 80s, they allowed people to buy houses that couldn't afford it, and then they never made payments. It wasn't a case of someone had lived in the home for years and then they got behind a few payments. It was 40% of the people never made the first payment, and then the market collapsed. So it seems like we're heading there again, but I hope not.
Well, it's yet again a big government solution when the market could provide the solution if local government got out of the way. Take away all these zoning regulations and all of these obstacles that you've got to jump over and give people a profit motive. I keep hearing about corporate greed at the Democratic convention, too. I call it corporate profits, which is what drives innovation, which is what drives job growth. It's what drives creation of things such as housing. Give us a profit motive, and the market will create the housing we need. And not only that, it will much more exactly than local government bureaucrats in California be able to pinpoint how much we need. If the government takes over, all of a sudden we're going to have an oversupply and create a different economic crisis. Let the market work. That's the part that, as I've watched this messaging this week, they've done a lot of things really well. Right. I appreciate the God and country thematics that have been missing from the Democratic rhetoric for a long time now. A big swing from 2019, 2020, when everything was about America's structural racism and what a corrupt, nasty country we are and how unfair and inequitable we are. This was a nice change, a mouthwash, basically,
right,
from what they had before. But a lot of this, what they're talking about are big government solutions, and we know they don't work, even if the goals are noble. I think Republicans share a lot of the same goals.
So it is interesting, though, because really, who follows these things? I mean, it's people like Brian and I that watch these kind of things. I don't think they make that much of a difference.
The conventions, you mean?
Yes,
yeah.
and they do mobilize because the people that are there as delegates are activists, and they're going to go back to their communities, and they're going to be fired up. It does help in that way.
And it provides them with talking points for when they're back in their communities.
That's right. But Vice President Harris is going to speak tonight. Do you think she will get on the stage before 11 o'clock at night?
Oh, my God. You know, part of the issue you're talking about, Georgians haven't seen the content that they were intended to see because the main speakers have been between 11 p.m. and midnight. If you have a kid who's got to be in school at 7:30 a.m., you're not seeing that. Or if you got to go to work, you're not seeing that. It has been poorly organized so far as what that goes, even though I'd say many of the speeches are well crafted, well delivered, a lot of talented speakers, including Georgia's own Raphael Warnock. But unless you are just a masochist or a glutton for punishment, who is staying up to watch these 11 p.m. to midnight? And look, if Democrats want to help themselves, get Kamala Harris on at 10 p.m. Eastern time, not at 11:15 p.m.
Well, it actually ought to be 9 o'clock, okay?
Absolutely.
I
agree.
Seriously. I mean, because that's when usually they have these big speeches. And, you know, when you, have a presidential address or something like that. And look, I'm not like I think that East Coast is the only way to go. But if 80% of the population of the country you want to represent lives, it's actually, I checked the numbers yesterday because I've used that number for a long time. It's about 75%. I double checked it. California is a big population base, but compared to all the other states, there's not very many people living there. And so what you do is start at 4 o'clock and be done by 10 or 11. And instead of being done by midnight, I mean, poor Joe Biden. I mean, come on, man. He was out there. He probably thought he was in a dream in the middle of the night when he got out there the other night.
It's true. It's true. They had to wake him up, rolling out there.
Get on out there. It'll be fine. I mean, it really needs to be. And look, we, to some degree, because we were in Central Time, too, in the Republican convention, but it was even CNN had to say, well, I guess it should be clear to say that the Republicans did manage their timing better than the Democrats had.
You know, speaking of CNN, that's actually where I watch too, for whatever reason. But the thing I found a bit because I watched the Republican and Democrat convention on CNN, is during the Republican convention, half of CNN's time was on their they had two panels with huge panels with a lot of people on them. I have not seen the panels much at all during the Democratic convention. It has been much more of a focus on the Democratic content as opposed to CNN giving analysis of Republican content, which is what we saw. I don't know that there's a conspiracy involved here, but it is a notable difference in how much more of the Democratic messaging I have received through that broadcast than I did on the Republican side.
They probably got a lot of complaints, because
that's possible.
People want to see the speakers. And I think they probably thought wrongly that the fact the Republican convention had a lot of no-name people in prime time, regular folks, that people didn't want to hear those. But if you were on the floor, which I was of the Republican convention, people were riveted to those speeches because they were real people. I mean, they weren't talking and deal making and doing all that stuff. They were listening to people, which I thought was really good. But I have gotten to where my go-to from CNN is Scott Jennings, which he is the conservative on there. But
very reasonable, right?
He's very reasonable, and he takes no prisoners.
Yeah.
And he is very, very good at it. But anyway, so is there a place in the Democratic Party today for a guy like Bill Clinton?
No, and I think there's a lot of Democrats asking today, why was he on the stage last night? And I think particularly in the post-Me Too era, they have a much harder time sort of whitewashing a lot of his record that in the 90s they rallied around him in a way that would be probably hard to do today. It was sort of an
attitude of everybody does it in the 90s.
Yeah.
And as long as you decided to stay together, no harm done, right?
That's right. Yeah, exactly. Everybody look the other way. We heard a lot about, like, why can't we be more like the French, where, they can do what they want to do. I mean, that's fine, but it's different when it's when you're the president and there's an intern involved. That's not okay, and I think we can all agree in today's modern world. So, but beyond those, what the libs call troublesome. They love troublesome. They love that word for anything in the past that they don't like now. But beyond those troublesome aspects, his moderation in economics wouldn't really find a home in the Democratic Party today. If you look at some of what he discussed last night, he brought some of those back to the surface, some things that do appeal to the middle and that make a lot of sense to me. For example, talking about how Democrats need to talk to non-Democrats civilly and respectfully. I think there is an implicit acknowledgement about the arrogance and intellectual condescension that the left and the establishment of this country, those who make the rules in the media and in academia and in corporate America, those who make those rules see those of us who vote Republicans as backward rubes. And that comes across in how they talk about issues and how they talk to us. And they think we're too dumb to notice, frankly. But what I say to them is, like, you wonder how Donald Trump gets away with being so crass and crude and rude. It's because a lot of his base has just felt stomped on. And they're like, finally, somebody talking to them the way they have talked to us all of these years. It's a little sharper. I think the condescension is a little more nuanced. But we hear it. And Bill Clinton last night spoke to that. Interestingly, Barack Obama spoke to that arrogance as well.
So, and again, I don't know if Barack Obama would be able to function in today's Democratic Party. I mean, he's still got a lot of power, obviously, because of what he was able to negotiate related to Joe Biden. But but he was a guy that was very progressive, personally, but governed more center left than far left. Okay, even though I don't agree with a lot of things he did, he could have been a lot worse, than what he was. Now, we got a couple of text messages that came in. It says, you're sounding great here in Beaufort. Concerning the Democratic Convention, do you ask the question of what's missing from the stage? Why is it that pretty boy from California, Gavin Newsom, where was he? I thought he was representing the youthful arm of the Democratic Party, yet he has not been seen yet. I believe they've thrown him under the bus because of what he's done to the beautiful state of California. What do you think about that? I see him in the delegation, but I haven't seen him on stage. Maybe I missed it.
And we haven't seen him acting as a major surrogate during the convention, as we saw him do during the debate here in Georgia back in June. He was everywhere. And maybe it's because the nominee is from California, also from the same jurisdiction. They're both from San Francisco. I think they tried to kind of downplay Nancy Pelosi's role at the same time. And, of course, Pelosi was I mean, she was the one holding the bloody knife when Biden had to step aside. I mean, and she doesn't even hide it, right?
No,
It's like, that was me. I had to do it.
Had to do what I had to do.
Yeah. History will judge me kindly, but I had to do it. So,
and she's older than he is.
Yeah, but you're beginning to see it a little bit there.
Did you notice she had to have someone walk around with her?
Oh, really?
She was on the arm of somebody, like, you know what I mean? Like as if they were helping her. Like, I'm sure she'd never go around with a cane.
Right.
You know what I mean? So she's
in her mid-80s.
She is.
Yeah,
she is.
And look, she's in great shape for somebody in their mid-80s, but I think this is just one thing that I think is happening in this convention and needs to happen on the Republican side, taking Trump is 78. But maybe J.D. Vance will begin to represent some of this. We have had these folks who are in their late 70s, early 80s for some time now. It's become normal, almost like we're,
Hey, Boomer.
Hey, Boomer. Yeah. I'm afraid that my Generation X might get skipped going down to the millennials. Now the millennials are in their early 40s. But we are getting to this transition of power to a new generation. I do think that their convention demonstrated it pretty well. Like there was a explicit call for transition. Thank you, Joe. Yay, Kamala, right? I mean, we saw it. I say new generation. She's 60. It's not like she's 44, which Clinton and Obama
60.
were in their early 40s when they ran the first time. So she's not a spring chicken, but still a generation handover. And I think on both parties that needs to happen. Handing it off to Brian Kemp's generation on our side.
I want to just pitch a really kind of interesting thing. Our mutual friend Eric Erickson posted on X yesterday. And I read it earlier, that his daughter's just started college. And the professor announced on the first day of class that she's getting so many AI essays that she is now carving out time in class to write short essays with open source material, handwritten, where the kids have to write it in class and turn it in. Yeah. I think that's great, actually.
I think we have no choice.
Yes.
I mean, I think the student's argument is going to be, well, I have this AI tool. Why would I not learn to use it? This is what I would do in the real world. That's true. But I taught at UGA at our alma mater, Martha, at the Grady College 8 years ago. And because of that one experience, they did a full semester. It was a write-intensive class, a lot of op-ed and letter to the editor writing and, that sort of persuasive writing. And I have thought about this issue a lot because of that experience. Like, how would I teach it today knowing that it's not going to be their thoughts? What's important to me, this is true as a citizen of this country and as a parent whose kid still has to go through, she's in second grade. I want my kid and everybody else's kid to learn how to think. That is what education is about. It's really not about the product. You're not going to publish these essays your students are writing. They're not going to change the world.
And you're not going to remember most of what you've learned.
No. But if you learn to think, and that's what, if higher education is not accomplishing that, then it's not working. It's not a good investment. So, I think Eric's on to something really important here. I'm glad to see that this professor is doing something that's smart, because I tell you, it would be mighty easy, maybe a little bit lazy, to just let students do the AI stuff, right? You can make an argument for it, but you're not learning to think.
Yeah, and I think I always tell people when they meet with me about, young people, about careers and things like that, and I just tell them that to do something they love, but also everywhere you work has got content. And that's what we call writing now. Okay, but they've got content. And if you can write a coherent sentence, paragraph, or page, you will always have work. Because very few people can do that.
Yeah.
I mean, our mutual friend Ryan Mahoney, one of the things I loved about him, and he was my campaign manager. It was his first job in Georgia, and then he's done a lot of other things since then.
Speaking of good hair, my gosh.
He's got great hair.
God, if I had his hair, I'd have my own Fox News primetime show. I would.
True. But he is one of the best writers I've ever worked with. And he can turn it out fast, and it's good, and he can do a great job. And he always has work,
Oh, absolutely. And I totally agree. That has been true in my career. If you can string a sentence together.
You're a great writer, too.
Thank you. And one thing I taught my students 8 years ago was, when you're writing complex topics, write in short sentences. The more complex, the shorter the sentence, because we're writing for an elementary school audience, always. Very simple. Keep it simple, stupid is the.
So when
approach.
I went back to school to get my master's degree, and I was having to write these big essays leading up to a thesis. Okay. And I kept getting comments back. You write like a journalist. You write like a journalist. I was like, well, yeah, that's what
right.
I do.
Yeah, and I bet you understood every word, didn't you?
That's right.
You pompous jerk.
That's right. So we're going to get into last night tonight. Friday, who knows what's going to happen with the RFK Trump thing.
Yeah.
I've said all along that this honeymoon bounce is going to be through this end of this convention. Yeah. And then what's really important is what happens between now and, I guess, when early voting starts. I mean, not that it's not important all the way to the end, but 50% of the votes will be cast by the time Election Day comes. So if you were advising, which I know you are advising to some degree, but what do you tell Republicans to do?
Well, Martha, let's talk on the state level here in Georgia because, look, Georgians within the sound of our voices, beyond the presidential election, which is all we're hearing about, there are legislative races down ballot that will impact your life every bit as much, maybe more so than who is in the White House. And the Georgia House Republican majority is always razor thin. It's 102 right now out of 180. But that's not many seats to flip for the Democrats. And let me tell you, in the metro Atlanta area, Trump at the top of the ticket hurts the Republicans down ballot. If Kemp is at the top of the ticket, it'd be a different story. We have to bake that in. I'm not being critical of anybody here. I'm just telling you the facts. And this is something that we've seen a notable difference since Kamala Harris came on the ticket for the Dems. We've seen a lot of energy on the Democrat side. So down ballot, voting for Republicans, making sure you don't just vote at the top of the ticket and walk out, right? We need you to vote down ballot.
All the way to the bottom.
All the way to the bottom. It's hugely important. And when I am telling them what we're doing on the state legislative side, which is where I'm advising right now, is what we hear the Democrats talking about this week a lot is abortion. Well, you know why they're doing that? Because in polling nationwide, they have an advantage on that issue. But do you know where abortion lands when it comes to voters' most important issues? Nowhere near number one, right? It is far down the list. You know what's number one? Immigration and public safety and the economy. Economy being number one and the others being number two. I said them backwards. So I'm telling Republicans, we poll much better. Voters trust us much more on the issues that they say are most important to them right now. So how about this? Let's not talk about Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. Let's talk about what we've done on these issues that matter to you. Georgia Republicans have cut taxes to make it easier for you to go to the grocery store and face those higher prices. We have given pay raises to public school teachers and to police officers who are on the front lines of public safety. We have passed a law to require sheriff's departments to hold criminal illegal immigrants until ICE takes them out of this state or they go through the judicial process. So when you tell us these are the issues that matter to you, we have concrete deliverables. And you can trust us to keep leading on these issues because you know where the Democrats really are on them, right? The Democrats are going to keep spending big bucks in Washington, flooding the market with dollars, and that's going to make it much harder to contain inflation moving forward. Now, I don't always trust our side, Martha, on the federal level to be responsible on spending either, but that's the way we get this inflation under control. Republicans need to talk about those issues because we're winning on those issues.
And stay on the issues, okay?
And stay on the issues. Don't talk about her race. Don't call her a DEI hire. Let's not even talk about her laugh. I know it's funny. It's a good time. We're winning on the issues that matter. It is an advantage to us to stick to them, and it hurts us when we go off. So, hey, that should be easy, but somehow it's not.
Well, and I think it's because in many cases when you're doing interviews, when you're doing things, that the interviewer is trying to get that soundbite. They're trying to get you to get off target and talk about something that's going to get them a lot of clicks. Let's just tell the truth there.
Yeah.
But the fact of the matter is, if you go around and you stay on issues, and you know what, I'm going to say this, don't spend so much time with GOP groups. The GOP groups are important to have, and you should already have them by now. And they should be doing volunteering for you and doing that. You've got to get to Kiwanis and church groups and Rotary and I mean, heck, talk to people on the square in the town where you're representing. Make sure you're getting out beyond the traditional people that make their mind up a year in advance.
You know, and in Georgia, Martha, it's my neighborhood. I live in the Ashford Park neighborhood of Brookhaven, and my precinct was a red dot in a sea of blue in 2016. Trump won my precinct by 100 votes. This is North DeKalb County. And 4 years later, Biden won that precinct by a heavy margin. 2 months after that, both Perdue and Loeffler won my precinct. So this is that swing district that we always talk about. This is it in real life. This is what it looks like. It is college-educated, white, metropolitan voters. And Republicans have got to be speaking to them. And let me tell you, that audience doesn't want to be talking about divisive social issues. I know those are important, and there are audiences that won't and need to hear about those. But if you want to get the winning margin, like you got your base, you got to get some independents, you got to get the people, get you over 50. The Republican base does not get you over 50 in Georgia. To get to the levels that Kemp and Raffensperger and Carr got to in 2022, you got to get a lot of folks who would never call themselves Republicans when a pollster calls.
To hear the full versions of last week's Martha Zoller shows, go to the podcast page at accesswdun.com, and you can follow me on social media at Martha Zoller.